Wow, can't believe it. My grandmother, you know, were poor farmers.
Of between $800,000 and $1 million.
Seriously?
Seriously?
Oh my gosh.
I think that would make £200,000.
Oh.
Oh.
Welcome to Antique Treasure BBC. Today, we're looking at the most valuable Antique Roadshow discoveries that turned ordinary people into overnight millionaires. What started as old paintings, forgotten keepsakes, and overlooked family possessions ended with some of the most shocking valuations in the history of the show. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more incredible stories of hidden wealth and unexpected fortune. Number 1. The FA Cup. Few items in Antique Roadshow history can be recognized instantly. This is one of them. So when the FA Cup appeared in front of the expert, his reaction was one of genuine disbelief.
It's a real pleasure to meet you. I'm really rather stunned and shocked with what you brought along. Now, why would you have fruiting vines embossed on a football trophy? You would normally expect to see a football stuck on top.
Somewhere.
Yeah. And there's nothing on this to indicate that it was made specially as a football trophy. Now, I might be banned from every football ground in the country for saying this, but I suspect this might have been an off-the-shelf piece.
Oddly enough, England's most famous football trophy doesn't really look like a football trophy at all. With its grape clusters and winding vines, it looks more like something designed for wine than for sport. And the story behind it is even more remarkable. After the original FA Cup was stolen, this replacement version was created in 1911 and went on to become a familiar sight for generations of football fans.
Is it possible to put a value on something like this, with all that history that you've just described?
I was just going to say, the hardest thing of all about this is trying to put a value on it. This is probably, along with maybe the Wimbledon trophy, the most famous cup in the country.
That led to the biggest question of all. How do you put a price on a national sporting icon?
I think quite comfortably this has got to be worth well over £1 million. The highest value piece of silver I've ever valued on the Antiques Roadshow.
Wow.
Not only was it valued at more than £1 million, it was also the most valuable piece of silver this expert had ever appraised in the history of Antique Roadshow. Number 2. Angel of the North. MAQUETTE. Millions of people have seen the Angel of the North, but very few have ever seen the version that came before it. So, when a small model of the famous sculpture appeared on Antiques Roadshow, the expert immediately knew he was looking at something special.
Coming to Gateshead, I was greatly looking forward to looking at Angel of the North, but I could have sworn it was a bit bigger than this.
Of course, this wasn't the giant steel sculpture that stands beside the road in Gateshead. It was the original bronze maquette, the model created before the full-scale monument was ever built.
That existed before the real thing.
So just to clarify, this is the bronze maquette for the 20-meter-high steel version.
This was the very model used to present Antony Gormley's vision to the people responsible for approving the project. That alone made it an important piece of the story behind one of Britain's most recognizable public artworks. What's interesting is that the Angel of the North wasn't always admired. When it was first proposed, many people thought it was too large, too unusual, and simply too ambitious. Over time, however, it became a symbol of the entire region.
You have created on its site probably the most successful contemporary sculpture in Britain.
That means this isn't just a small sculpture. It's the original blueprint of an artwork that transformed the landscape of Northeast England. And the art market reflects that significance.
Another version did sell very recently. Admittedly, it was taller, and it wasn't of bronze, and that made about £2 million, or rather a little bit over that.
If another version had already sold for more than £2 million, the only question left was how much this one might be worth.
I would comfortably value it at £1 million.
£1 million for a bronze model. But what was really being valued here wasn't just the sculpture itself. It was the original idea that existed long before the Angel of the North became one of Britain's most famous landmarks. Number 3. The Fabergé flower.
We call it the regimental jewel.
The regiment, the Worcestershire Yeomanry, later to become the Queen's Own Worcestershire Hussars, was formed in 1794 to protect these shores against a Napoleonic invasion.
At first glance, it's just a small flower displayed in a clear vase. But from the moment the expert saw it, he knew he was looking at something extraordinary. Known as the regimental jewel, this piece belongs to the Worcestershire Yeomanry. Its story dates back to the Boer War, when soldiers left home to fight overseas. Before they departed, they were given silk pear blossoms to wear on their hats as a reminder of the county they were leaving behind. After the war, the Countess of Dudley commissioned Fabergé to create a permanent version of that flower.
This looks for all the world like a glass vase, and there's a stratagem here that it's filled with water, and this is the meniscus, the top of the water, but in actual fact it isn't. It's a solid block of what is apparently glass, but it's certainly not. It's stone. It's rock crystal. The flowers are made of enameled silver and tiny silver stamens, but in the center there's a dewdrop of diamond.
The closer it was examined, the more remarkable it became. The vase isn't glass at all, but carved rock crystal. The stem is made of gold. The blossoms are crafted from enameled silver. At the center of each flower sits a tiny diamond dewdrop. Even the leaves are carved from Siberian jade. But its true value goes far beyond the precious materials. This isn't simply a Fabergé masterpiece. It serves as a symbol connecting generations of soldiers from the same regiment.
I think it provides that link for all the different ages of soldiers that have soldiered with the regiment and are intending in the future to soldier with the regiment.
I find Fabergé things on the Antiques Roadshow, but nothing of this scale. And I can tell you that the size of the object, the sophistication of the object, the provenance of the object brings it very, very close to only 2 other flower studies in the United Kingdom which are in the Royal Collection. Given what are the qualifications I've already put on this object, it is a towering masterpiece of the goldsmith's art by the most famous goldsmith of the 20th century.
Although he had appraised many Fabergé pieces before, the expert said he had never encountered anything like this on Antiques Roadshow. And then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Can you guess what it was worth?
This is worth £1 million.
Really? It certainly isn't
No.
for sale.
Well, that's the
I'm
rub.
just a custodian.
I know.
But for its owner, this was never something to be sold. It is a piece of regimental history preserved on behalf of those who served in the past and those who will serve in the future. Number 4. Diego Rivera's El Albañil.
The painting for some time was in bad condition, and it was hanging behind a door.
Behind a door?
Behind a door in the house.
Dear.
If that door was open, then you couldn't see the painting.
That was the story behind Diego Rivera's El Albañil. The owner's family had possessed the painting for more than 80 years, yet for much of that time, they had no idea they were living with an important piece of Mexican art history. What immediately caught the expert's attention wasn't the painting's condition, but the story surrounding it. In the art world, there is one phrase that always excites researchers.
There are 2 extraordinarily intriguing words in an artist's catalog of paintings, and those are whereabouts unknown.
For decades, El Albañil had been considered a lost painting. Records of the work still existed in Mexico City, but nobody knew where it was. Now, after years of being missing, it had unexpectedly surfaced on the Antiques Roadshow appraisal table.
Diego Rivera, who is arguably one of the most important Latin American 20th century artists, was only 18 years old.
Rivera painted this work in 1904 when he was just 18 years old. It comes from an extremely early period in the career of the man who would later become one of the most important Latin American artists of the 20th century. Even the signature tells part of that story.
It's a very young man's signature. It's one of his school signatures rather than the more formal, mature signature that we'll see later.
Oh, really?
After being authenticated and restored, the painting was no longer a forgotten family possession. It had reclaimed its place in the history of art.
I think you have something of a painting trifecta here.
A great artist, a remarkable story, and an important painting. That combination led to an extraordinary valuation.
I would be putting a retail estimate on the piece of between $800,000 and $1 million.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Unbelievable. I did not expect that. I'm astounded.
Number 5. The Frederic Remington portrait. What could possibly be special about an ordinary family portrait? Sometimes, the most valuable item doesn't make a great first impression. In this case, what caught the expert's attention first wasn't the painting itself, but the way its owner was handling it.
Finally, I said, get the painting out of that box and stop putting it back in and out of that box before you get it damaged.
The owner kept sliding the painting in and out of the cardboard box he had brought it in. But once the artwork was finally removed completely, the expert immediately realized he was looking at something remarkable.
It was more than I could have dreamed of. It was a fabulous late 19th century Remington portrait.
Painted in 1896, the portrait was the work of Frederic Remington, one of the most celebrated artists of the American West. The man in the painting was Leah Fabergé, the owner's great-grandfather and a personal friend of Remington. What made the piece stand out even more was that it came with part of its history still attached.
It also comes with this letter from Remington to your great-grandfather. Right. The letter was Remington speaking to the sitter and how much he enjoyed their time together, and there was a lot of meat in it, which is really what you want. There was no anonymity to it at all. It was personal for Remington, and it was personal for the sitter.
The letter confirmed the relationship between the artist and his subject, providing exactly the kind of provenance collectors hope to find. After Remington's death, the painting spent time in his New York home and studio, before eventually returning to the sitter's family.
The letter itself is worth probably about $2,000.
But the real value wasn't in the letter. It was in the portrait itself.
This piece together with the letter would be something that I would value at auction between $600,000
Oh my goodness.
and $800,000.
I was hoping.
That was already an extraordinary figure. But years later, as the market continued to rise, the painting's value climbed even higher.
In today's market in 2019, I would value the painting between $800,000 and $1.2 million.
A family portrait, a personal letter, and a work important enough to rank among the most valuable treasures ever featured on Antiques Roadshow. Number 6. The Rolex Oyster COSMOGRAPH. Many items on Antiques Roadshow are valuable because of their history, but sometimes enormous value comes from a single decision made decades earlier. In this case, the story began with a U.S. Air Force serviceman and a Rolex he purchased while stationed in Thailand in the early 1970s.
I brought in a Rolex watch that I had purchased while I was in military.
It says $345.97.
At the time, nearly $346 was a significant amount of money for a young serviceman. He bought the watch after admiring the Rolexes worn by military pilots. But shortly after purchasing it, he made a choice that would end up changing its future value forever.
I looked at it and I said, you know, this is really too nice to take down in salty water. It stayed there for 30 or 40 years.
He didn't wear it to work. He didn't wear it on special occasions. In fact, he barely wore it at all. Instead, the watch was placed in a safety deposit box and almost forgotten for the next 4 decades. That's when the story took an unexpected turn. When the expert opened the box, nearly everything was still there. The original box, the original paperwork, the brochures, even documents that had never been filled out.
A blank paper today is probably worth about $2,000.
The watch itself was an extraordinary find. It was a Rolex Daytona reference, 6,263, a model already highly sought after by collectors. But what made this example different was its condition. It looked almost untouched.
Your watch is more special. It says it.
Similar Daytonas had already sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet the expert believed this watch belonged in an entirely different category because it remained so complete, so original, and so remarkably well preserved.
Your watch at auction today, $500,000 to $700,000.
You're good.
No, I'm very serious.
A watch purchased with a serviceman's paycheck had become one of the most valuable timepieces ever featured on Antiques Roadshow. And the greatest irony of all was that the very thing that made it so valuable was the fact that it had barely been used.
You can't wear it though. If you wear it, it drops down to the $400,000 value.
Number 7. The Navajo First Phase blanket.
Nobody's ever looked at it that I'm aware of.
For generations, this blanket had simply been part of the family. The owner knew very little about it. He had heard that it might have been connected to Kit Carson and passed down through the family, but beyond that, it was just an old blanket that had always been there. What happened next was something he never expected.
Did you notice when you showed this to me that I kind of stopped breathing a little bit?
Yeah, you did.
I'm still having a little bit of trouble breathing here.
The expert's reaction said everything. The longer he looked, the more convinced he became that he was standing in front of one of the most important Native American textiles he had ever encountered on Antiques Roadshow.
And it's not just a chief's blanket, it's the first type of chief's blanket made.
This wasn't simply an old blanket. It was a first phase chief's blanket, woven by Navajo artisans for Ute leaders sometime between the 1840s and 1860s. Its design was strikingly simple. No elaborate patterns, no complicated decoration. Yet that simplicity was exactly what made it so important.
This is Navajo weaving in its purest form. All of these things that we see later with diamonds and all kinds of different patterns comes much later than this. This is just pure linear design. This is the beginning of Navajo weaving.
In many ways, this textile represented the foundation of an entire weaving tradition. Even more remarkable was its condition. After more than a century and a half, it had survived in a state that few experts would have thought possible.
The condition of this is unbelievable. Unbelievable. We see these, we've got a little bit of damage over there. We have a very interesting thing here. This is almost like silk. It's made from hand-woven wool, but it's so finely done, it's like silk. Wow. It would repel water. And this here is dyed with indigo dyes. It was a very valuable dye at the time. And what's really interesting is right here, we have an old repair that was probably done in the 1860s. And it's done with raveled bayeta, which is in itself a very important thing in Navajo weaving. So all involved. It's an extraordinary piece of art. It's extremely rare. It is the most important thing that's come into the roadshow that I've seen.
Its age, rarity, and historical importance placed it in a category far beyond most antiques. Then came the question that changed the mood of the appraisal.
Are you a wealthy man, Ted?
No.
The answer drew a laugh, but only moments later, the true significance of the blanket became clear.
On a really bad day, this textile would be worth $350,000. On a good day, it's about $500,000.
Oh my God.
$500,000 for a blanket, yet the most unforgettable part of the story came after the valuation.
I'm just laying on the back of a chair.
Well, sir, you have a national treasure.
For years, a national treasure had been resting on the back of a chair, and an entire family had been living alongside a piece of American history without ever realizing it. Number 8, the Alexander Calder Mobile, a simple thank you gift. One that turned out to be worth far more than anyone could have imagined. Can you guess how much this gift was really worth?
My aunt was very creative, and among other things, she had done a needlepoint pillow of one of Calder's works.
The story began at a cocktail party many decades ago. Among the guests was Alexander Calder, one of the most influential American artists of the 20th century. While visiting the house, he noticed a handmade needlepoint pillow created by the owner's aunt. The design was based on one of his own artworks. Calder was fascinated by it, and the aunt decided to give the pillow to him as a gift. A few days later, something unexpected arrived in return.
He had given her this mobile as a thank you for the pillow.
The gift was an original Calder mobile. It sounds almost unbelievable. A handmade pillow exchanged for a work of fine art. Yet, the story was well documented, and the provenance was clear.
Alexander Calder essentially invented the art form known as a mobile.
Calder is widely credited with creating the modern mobile. His delicate metal forms, balanced shapes, and gentle movement transformed sculpture into something that interacted with the space around it. Although this particular piece had undergone some restoration and still required authentication from the Calder Foundation, its significance was undeniable.
Based upon that, a fair auction value, the range is somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000.
How much?
That estimate alone was enough to leave the owner speechless, but the expert wasn't finished.
In a good retail setting, it would not be at all inconceivable that this very small, wonderful piece of art could probably break $1 million.
Oh my God.
$1 million for a piece of art that had originally been exchanged for a handmade pillow. And then came the perfect closing line.
Not bad for a pillow.
Oh, My problem is I've got one mobile and 2 children.
Number 9. The British Army Silver Centerpiece.
It was presented to the 10th Hussars, Prince of Wales's own, by King George IV on his accession to the throne.
This centerpiece once stood in the officers' mess of the King's Royal Hussars and came with a remarkable connection to both the British Army and the monarchy. That history alone would have made it an important object, but the appraisal took an unexpected turn when the expert began examining the maker's mark.
We've actually got a maker's mark appearing here, and the maker's mark there is PR. Now that is not Paul Storr's mark.
For years, it had been believed that the piece was made by Paul Storr, one of Britain's most celebrated silversmiths, yet the mark stamped into the silver told a different story.
Rundle, Bridge and Rundle, the Royal Goldsmiths. The maker's mark there is that of Philip Rundell. I would suggest the greatest firm that there has ever been in the history of silver.
Far from reducing its importance, that discovery linked the centerpiece to an even more influential name. Rundell, Bridge, and Rundell served as royal goldsmiths and employed many of the finest craftsmen of the Regency era. The piece itself was made of silver gilt, silver covered with a layer of gold, and was designed less as a practical object and more as a statement of prestige and power. Most importantly, it was unique, commissioned by a king, presented to one of Britain's most distinguished cavalry regiments. Those details placed it in a category few antiques could ever reach.
And its last valuation, we believe about 10 years ago, had it in the area of £750,000.
Right, 750,000. I would go along with that. It is, after all, a unique piece, commissioned by the king for presentation to one of the greatest of all the regiments.
£750,000 for a piece of silver. But for collectors, its true value lies in something much rarer, a one-of-a-kind object that connects the British monarchy, the military, and more than 2 centuries of history. Number 10. The Imperial Chinese Robe.
There are those moments in your life that you will always remember, and I will always remember standing here, but I'll certainly always remember the first time that I saw this spectacular robe.
Some discoveries stay with an expert forever. This robe was one of them. The family explained that it had been brought back to Britain from Asia by their grandfather many decades ago. Beyond that, very little was known about its history. What truly shocked everyone, however, wasn't where it came from. It was where it had been kept.
It was in the dressing up box.
No. So did you wear it as a child?
Oh, yes.
For years, generations of children had treated it as a costume. Only during this appraisal did the family discover what they actually owned. The expert quickly dated the robe to around 1,750 and realized it was something exceptionally rare.
So look, 1750, it certainly would be imperial.
This was an imperial Chinese court robe, nearly 275 years old. Its details revealed its status immediately. 5-clawed dragons, flaming pearls, crashing waves, and a richly woven red brocade lining were all symbols associated with the highest levels of the imperial court. Objects like this rarely appear on the open market. In fact, the expert struggled to think of another comparable example outside a major museum collection.
The only other ones I know of this type, you'd have to go to Beijing and you'd have to go to the Palace Museum to see one of these.
There were signs of age. Some of the metallic threads had oxidized, and evidence suggested the hem had been altered at some point in its history. Yet none of that diminished its extraordinary rarity. For the expert, this was the kind of object most people never encounter in an entire career. Then came the valuation.
If that comes up at auction, with the way the market is at the moment, I think that would make £200,000.
Oh.
Oh. Severely oh.
£200,000 for a robe that had spent decades in a dressing-up box. And in that moment, the owner immediately understood one thing.
Well, we won't put it in the dressing-up box again.
Number 11, the John F. Kennedy jacket. How much could an old jacket really be worth? The answer depends entirely on who once wore it.
If jackets could talk, I think this one would have an amazing story to tell.
This jacket belonged to JFK, the President of the United States.
If that claim was true, this was no longer just a jacket. It was a piece of history connected to one of the most recognizable political figures of the 20th century. But in the world of celebrity memorabilia, a claim alone is never enough. The real value lies in the story and whether that story can be proven. The trail behind this jacket led to Gunilla von Post, a Swedish woman who was said to have had a romantic relationship with John F. Kennedy before his marriage to Jacqueline Bouvier.
She was JFK's lover before he got married to Jacqueline Bouvier.
According to the family, the jacket remained among her belongings for years before passing through relatives and friends and eventually finding its way to its current owners. That chain of ownership was exactly what the expert wanted to examine.
Without the provenance, you're not going to get the dollar signs.
In collecting, provenance can mean everything. It can be the difference between an ordinary vintage jacket and an artifact worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. Fortunately, the details began to support the story.
It is a 44, and he was a 44.
The size matched JFK. The ownership history appeared consistent. And together, those details made the jacket increasingly attractive to collectors of American political history.
It is an iconic piece. He was a cool dude. Should you decide to sell somewhere along the line of between maybe 200,000 and 300,000 pounds?
That is a lot of money.
200,000 to 300,000 pounds for a jacket. Yet before the appraisal ended, the expert emphasized something even more valuable than the estimate itself.
The story is everything.
Yes.
Please write it down.
Yes.
Put it in the pocket.
Because without the story, it's just an old piece of clothing. But with the story preserved, it becomes something far more powerful, a personal connection to the life of John F. Kennedy. Number 12. The L.S. Lowry painting. It wasn't surprising to find a Lowry painting appearing in the region most closely associated with the artist. What surprised the expert was the quality of this one.
I couldn't have been more surprised and delighted.
The painting was brought in by a friend on behalf of an elderly owner. For many years, it had simply been part of the family's home, hanging quietly on the wall with little thought given to its significance. But from the moment he saw it, the expert had a strong feeling he was looking at something special.
All my instincts and the way that it looks makes me feel it's absolutely spot on and beautiful. What's the story?
I brought it in for a friend of mine, an elderly gentleman, about 79 years of age. They did belong to his wife, who's passed away.
Although it would still need formal authentication from the Lowry Museum, the early signs were extremely encouraging. The scene contained all the characteristics collectors associate with Lowry's work: industrial buildings, crowded streets, and small figures moving through the everyday life of northern England.
1937, a good early period. I just love the colour and the busyness of the streets. And for my own taste, it is not too melancholic, it's not too brooding. It has a busyness and kind of optimistic air.
Rather than feeling gloomy or bleak, the painting seemed full of movement and energy. The streets felt alive, and the overall mood carried a sense of optimism that particularly appealed to the expert. Adding to the story was a small sketch on a cigarette packet, reportedly signed by Lowry after a friend persuaded him not to throw it away. Details like that can make provenance feel far more personal. Then came the question everyone was waiting for. If this really was an original Lowry, what was it worth?
I think it's probably worth £100,000.
Gosh.
More than £100,000 for a painting that had spent years hanging quietly in a private home. A familiar picture on a wall, a friend's favor to bring it in for appraisal, and, perhaps, a significant piece of British art waiting to be rediscovered. Number 13. Henry Moore's Love Letters.
You can imagine my surprise to see such an enormous collection of letters from this incredibly great artist.
The author of these letters was Henry Moore, one of the most influential sculptors of the 20th century. But what made this collection remarkable wasn't simply the name at the bottom of each page. It was the name at the top.
To Dearest Evelyn. Now, who is Dearest Evelyn?
She's my mother.
In an instant, the appraisal became something far more personal. These were not business letters or professional correspondence. They were deeply affectionate letters that offered a glimpse into an important relationship from the early years of Moore's life.
I can't help just reading a few comments here, seem to be incredibly intimate and very, very important.
The collection contained around 31 letters, many of them decorated with small sketches drawn directly onto the pages. That detail immediately caught the expert's attention.
And I've seen very few Henry Moore letters come onto the market. Still less have I seen ones with drawings in them.
The drawings displayed Moore's unmistakable style, ranging from playful doodles to quick figure studies created with only a few confident lines. They were more than personal letters. They were original works created by one of Britain's greatest artists. The family also revealed that Moore had once drawn a portrait for Evelyn, but it was later damaged in a flood and lost. Even so, the surviving letters remained an extraordinary discovery.
This magnificent collection of Henry Moore would, I suppose, be worth somewhere in the region of about £50,000.
£50,000 for a bundle of handwritten letters, but the expert believed their importance extended far beyond their market value.
I think the chances are that no biographer has actually had a chance to read these at all.
Each letter had the potential to reveal previously unknown details about Henry Moore's life. A private romance, an unpublished archive, and a rare opportunity to see one of Britain's most celebrated artists through his own words and drawings. Number 14, the Petrus Van Schendel painting.
But I never expected that we'd actually get brought in a museum quality picture. But that's what you've brought in.
From the moment he saw it, the expert knew this was no ordinary painting. The scene depicts a bustling nighttime market illuminated by candlelight. Light spills across the face of a vendor, glimmers off metal surfaces, and guides the viewer through a crowd of figures moving through the darkness. In the distance, moonlight settles softly over rooftops and ships' masts. What impressed the expert most was the artist's extraordinary command of light.
Just look at the way he has handled the whole light in this market scene. The way the light comes off the candle and illuminates her face. It's the most brilliant piece of work. And you've got the source of light here, then you've got another candle light here.
The owner explained that the painting had been passed down through the family. Her father-in-law had worked in a fish market as a boy, which may explain why he felt such a connection to the subject. Then the expert pointed to the signature.
And then, to reveal all, down at the bottom, is the signature here.
Yes.
P. Van Schendel.
Yes.
Petrus Van Schendel. A Dutch painter, but he worked in Belgium and Holland.
The signature belonged to Petrus Van Schendel, a Dutch painter renowned for his dramatic scenes illuminated by candles and moonlight.
He absolutely specialized in these moonlit, candlelit scenes. It was his trademark, if you like. It was what he was absolutely brilliant at. And he was working in the middle of the 19th century, between about 1830 and 1870 was when he was really in his prime. Painted in oil on this very nice bit of wood. Well, just quality is the word for it. It is by probably the leading candlelight painter of the 19th century.
Throughout his career, Van Schendel devoted himself to mastering these effects, becoming one of the most respected painters of artificial light in 19th century Europe. The quality of this example left a particularly strong impression on the expert.
Probably make between 70 and 90,000 pounds.
The valuation alone was enough to leave the owner stunned. But the expert believed it deserved even greater protection.
So you should probably insure it for £100,000.
Wow. Thank you.
Almost like winning the lottery. Almost. £100,000 for insurance.
Number 15. The Cartier Citrine jewellery.
Sometimes a jewel will give me that immediate head rush of excitement. And that's what these jewels have done to me.
Not every piece of jewelry makes an expert react before the appraisal has even begun. These pieces did. Sitting inside a red Cartier box were a brooch and a pair of earrings that had belonged to the owner's mother. For years, they were simply cherished family heirlooms. The owner remembered seeing her mother wear them, but never realized just how significant they might be. That changed the moment the Cartier name came into the conversation.
The red box with the Cartier signature inside, they are Cartier jewels. And they are both signed on the back.
The Cartier signature immediately caught the expert's attention, but the real surprise was their age. The family believed the pieces had been purchased in the 1970s. Instead, the expert identified them as being much older.
They are 40s jewels. Because of the austerity years, obviously with the war, you couldn't get the diamonds and the rubies and emeralds and sapphires, and so other stones took over.
These jewels dated from the 1940s, a period shaped by wartime shortages. With diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires becoming difficult to obtain, designers turned to alternative gemstones such as citrine, topaz, and aquamarine. Cartier embraced those materials and transformed them into bold, distinctive designs that remain highly collectible today. Although the earrings had been altered from clip-ons to pierced earrings, they still retained considerable value. The brooch, however, was the piece that truly captivated the expert.
This brooch, which I would run away, I would run away with. I just think it's spectacular. The earrings, because they've been altered, you'd be looking in a region of about £10,000. I would say you're probably looking in the region of around about £30,000.
Together, the family jewelry was worth around £40,000.
Goodness me, that is a lot more than I thought.
But for the owner, the true value extended beyond Cartier and beyond the citrine gemstones. These pieces still carried memories of her mother wearing them on special occasions, turning a remarkable collection of jewelry into an irreplaceable part of her family's story. Number 16, the Tiffany lamp. Not every item that arrives at Antique Roadshow is trusted immediately. When it comes to Tiffany lamps, suspicion is often the first step of the appraisal process.
One has to approach any Tiffany lamp with the deepest suspicion. This is in no way questioning your story, but fakes abound.
The owner explained that the lamp had been in her family for generations. According to her mother, it was purchased from Tiffany Studios in New York around 1910. It was a fascinating family story, but with anything connected to Tiffany, a good story alone is never enough. The market is filled with reproductions and convincing fakes, which meant the expert had to examine every detail before reaching any conclusions. The most important moment came when the lamp was switched on.
Can we turn it on and see what happens? Right, so it's got there. Now I think we can see immediately the colours burst out of.
Instantly, the entire piece seemed to come alive. Light passed through layers of richly colored glass, revealing shades and textures that were almost invisible when the lamp was unlit. The mottled glass deepened in color, creating the luminous effect that made Tiffany lamps famous around the world. Its design also displayed all the hallmarks of the Art Nouveau movement, with flowing lines and natural forms inspired by plants and flowers.
It's absolutely classic.
The longer the expert studied it, the more promising it appeared, but one significant problem remained.
The only problem is the lack of the mark.
The lamp carried no visible Tiffany signature, something normally found on the base or the shade. That absence did not prove it was a reproduction, but it made authentication far more complicated. So, rather than offering absolute certainty, the expert remained cautious. Based on the design, craftsmanship, and family provenance, he believed the lamp had the potential to be a very important piece.
I think in terms of insurance, 10 years ago, I'd have given double the price I'm giving now. And now I would say for insurance, you've got to think about 20 or 30,000.
An insurance value of 20 to 30,000 pounds for a lamp still awaiting a definitive answer. And perhaps that uncertainty is what makes this story so intriguing. Because if future research were to confirm it as a genuine Tiffany, its true significance could be far greater than anyone in the room realized. Number 17. The Paul Stohr Claret Jugs.
My husband bought them in the early 60s because we liked them. We paid £50 for them, which we thought was rather a lot in those days.
£50?
Yes.
Right, yes.
That is exactly how the story of these claret jugs began. In the early 1960s, the owner's husband bought them simply because they appealed to him. At the time, £50 felt like a considerable amount of money, but they were purchased for enjoyment rather than investment. For decades, they remained cherished household possessions. Then they arrived at Antique Roadshow.
The condition is absolutely stunning. I mean, everything is as crisp as the day it was made. The glassing, it's just so sharp.
The first thing that caught the experts' attention was their remarkable condition. The engraved details remained crisp. The glass was beautifully clear. Even the silver showed very little wear, preserving the sharpness and elegance of the original craftsmanship. And there was something else that made them especially desirable. They had survived together.
Finding a pair of claret jugs is unusual. They turn up, but most often you simply find a claret jug.
A single claret jug can be valuable in its own right. Finding a matching pair after nearly 2 centuries is considerably rarer. The vine decorations flowing from the lid to the base perfectly suited their original purpose, but the most important discovery was hidden in the hallmarks.
Well, they're made in London, and we've got a date here of 1838, but the maker really could not be better. The maker in this case is Paul Storr.
With those words, the appraisal moved to an entirely different level. Paul Storr is widely regarded as one of the greatest silversmiths in British history, and his work remains highly sought after by collectors around the world.
One of the greatest of the silversmiths that has ever been.
Dated to 1838, preserved in exceptional condition, and crafted by one of the finest names in silver, the pair was worth far more than the family had ever imagined.
We should be looking at a value of somewhere around 30,000 plus.
What? Wow, that's fabulous.
More than £30,000 for 2 pieces originally bought simply because they were admired. But the most touching moment came afterward.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, I do wish my husband was here to hear that.
It was a simple remark, yet it perfectly captured the heart of the story. Because behind every valuable object is someone who chose to keep it. And in this case, it was proof that the owner's husband had an exceptional eye when he selected what would turn out to be a truly outstanding piece of silver. Number 18. The Emile Gallet vase.
It has traveled a very, very long way. It comes from Kiev in Ukraine. And my grandmother bought it, I think 75, maybe 80 years ago, before the Second World War.
The story of this vase began long before anyone knew who had made it. Purchased in Kiev before the Second World War, it was simply a decorative object that became part of the family's everyday life. No one imagined it would one day be sitting on an Antique Roadshow appraisal table. Then history intervened. The war scattered the family. The owner's grandfather went off to fight, while her mother endured years of hardship during the Nazi occupation. When the family finally returned to Kiev after the war, they had no idea whether any of their possessions had survived.
And inside the bundle was all their crockery, and on top of it was this vase. No. So it survived all those trials and tribulations.
Against all odds, the vase was still there. It had survived the war, the displacement, and the uncertainty that followed. Years later, during a visit to a museum in Berlin, the family noticed a vase with remarkably similar colors and decoration. The label beside it sparked their curiosity. Back home, they began researching the piece more carefully.
The minute I saw it, I knew said Gallet.
The expert immediately recognized the signature style of Emile Gallet, one of the most important figures of the French Art Nouveau movement. Created around 1890, the vase featured sophisticated cameo glass techniques, layered colors, and distinctive sunflower motifs that reflected Gallet's artistic vision.
Emile Gallet, at the end of the 19th century, was one of those artists who really took the movement of Art Nouveau in France to a whole new level.
This was more than a beautiful decorative object. It was the work of an artist who helped define an entire artistic movement. Eventually, the discussion turned to value.
If you had to go out and replace this vase, you are looking at something in the region of £8,000 to £12,000.
£8,000 to £12,000 for a vase. Yet for this family, its greatest value was never financial. It was a piece of history purchased by chance in Kiev, carried through one of the darkest periods of the 20th century. and finally recognized for what it truly was, a surviving work of Émile Gallé. Number 19. The Beatrice Cenci Micromosaic. At first glance, most people would assume this is simply a painted portrait. The closer you look, however, the more extraordinary it becomes.
I was amazed that something made from stone or ceramic could actually look like a painting.
These are actually glass.
What appears to be a painting is actually something entirely different. This is a micromosaic, a highly specialized art form created from thousands of tiny pieces of colored glass assembled so precisely that, from a distance, they become almost indistinguishable from brushstrokes.
Up to 15,000 different colors in glass would have been made to create micromosaic artwork.
That remarkable craftsmanship is only part of the story. The subject of the portrait is Beatrice Cenci, one of the most tragic and controversial figures in Italian history. According to the story that has survived through the centuries, she endured years of abuse at the hands of her father before becoming involved in his murder. She was later tried, convicted, and executed, transforming her into a figure viewed by many as both a victim and a criminal.
She was both a heroine as well as a murderess.
She's a tragic hero, absolutely, yeah.
Her dramatic story inspired generations of artists, writers, and poets throughout the 19th century. As the expert examined the plaque more closely, he discovered the signature of Moglia.
It was almost certainly done in Italy.
The Moglia family was among the finest makers of Italian micromosaics, and works of this scale rarely appear on the market.
The art of micromosaic on this sort of scale, which is actually very, very large for a mosaic, is incredibly rare and incredibly exciting to find on Antiques Roadshow.
That rarity explains why the expert could barely contain his excitement.
I nearly leapt over my colleague to look at this.
Then came the valuation.
I would think an insurance valuation of $85,000.
Cool.
Would be a fair price.
$85,000 for a work assembled from countless tiny fragments of glass. But what makes it truly memorable is the way a centuries-old Italian tragedy was preserved in a masterpiece that, at first glance, looks like nothing more than an ordinary painting. Number 20. The Magnus Colcord Heirloom Painting. Not every valuable item is measured by a seven-figure valuation. Sometimes, what makes an object truly special is the memories it carries from one generation to the next. This painting was commissioned by the owner's grandfather in Alaska in 1964. The family lived in Fairbanks, and for as long as he could remember, the painting had been a familiar presence on the wall of the family home.
It definitely has a lot of sentimental value.
For him, this was never just a winter landscape. It was a connection to family history and a reminder of Alaska, a place he had heard about throughout his childhood and always hoped to explore more deeply.
It just really captures the mystique and the frontier of Alaska, going to the unknown.
The scene captures many of the images most closely associated with Alaska: snow-covered wilderness, a dog sled team, and the northern lights stretching across the night sky. But for the owner, the painting represents more than scenery. It brings back a feeling that has stayed with him for years.
So it definitely brings back that feeling of seeing the lights for the first time.
The artist was Magnus Colcord Heirlund, better known as Rusty Heirlund. Born in Sweden, raised near Boston, and drawn to Alaska in 1916, Heirlund spent much of his life painting the landscapes and frontier spirit of the far north. What impressed the expert most was not the technique or the color palette, but something far more difficult to achieve.
He really was able to capture quiet.
The quiet of vast open spaces, where nature seems endless and untouched. The painting is signed and dated 1964, and works by Heirlund can also be found in museum collections throughout Alaska. Then came the valuation.
I would give it an auction estimate of between $40,000 and $60,000.
The auction estimate was placed at between $40,000 and $60,000, with an insurance value of around $75,000. Yet the owner's response made it clear that this was never about the money.
Don't plan on selling it. It's a family piece.
And perhaps that is the perfect way to end this countdown. After all the million-dollar treasures and record-breaking appraisals, this painting serves as a reminder that some of the most meaningful antiques are valued not for what they could sell for, but for the family memories they preserve. Number 21, the Dalu sculpture.
Now this is a truly rare and exciting piece, the like of which I haven't seen for years and years.
To the family, this had always been a portrait bust of a great-grandmother. It had been passed down through generations, quietly sitting among family possessions for as long as anyone could remember.
This has been in my family, well, forever as far as I know. Do you know who she is? We're told it's my great-grandmother.
But the expert immediately recognized that the real story was not the sitter. It was the sculptor. The piece was attributed to Jules Dalu, one of the most important French sculptors of the 19th century.
And he was in England between 1871 and 79, because I believe the date is what?
It's dated 1873.
That's perfect.
The date aligned perfectly with the years Dalu spent working in England after leaving France. That connection alone made the sculpture far more significant than anyone had imagined. According to the expert, Dalu helped transform modern sculpture by moving away from rigid academic traditions and creating figures that felt natural, expressive, and deeply human.
You're looking at Impressionism in sculpture. This is a critical piece of sculpture, not...
Even though the terracotta showed some cracking and condition issues, its artistic importance remained unmistakable.
British sculpture was never the same again after the impact of Dalu.
Then came the valuation. Comparable Dalu works had sold for well over £30,000, and although the condition affected the final figure, the estimate was still impressive.
But I think if we said £25,000, we wouldn't be far adrift. He's a really major figure.
£20,000 to £25,000 for a sculpture that had long been regarded as nothing more than a family portrait. And perhaps the final comment summed up the entire story perfectly.
To me, she's a great piece of art, and I'm so delighted to see it. It's really made my year. Thank you very much.
What began as a beloved family heirloom turned out to be a serious work of art. Not bad at all for a bust that everyone simply called Great Granny. Number 22, the Beatrix Potter letter. How much could a letter written to a child possibly be worth? At first glance, this seems like nothing more than a charming family keepsake. But when the author is Beatrix Potter, the story immediately becomes much more interesting.
This is such a good Beatrix Potter letter that I feel I have to read it all the way through. My dear Marjorie, and I was so much pleased to hear about your little white bunnies.
From the very first lines, the letter feels unmistakably Beatrix Potter. Rather than a formal piece of correspondence, it reads like a miniature story filled with animals, warmth, and the imagination that made her famous around the world.
My bunnies are always brown, but I had once had a clear white rat with pink eyes. His name was Sammy.
What makes this letter so special is not simply the signature at the bottom. Throughout the pages are charming illustrations and animal characters that seem to step straight out of the world of Peter Rabbit.
I've got a rabbit and a squirrel now. I bought 2 squirrels, but the one I called Nutkin, and here is a picture of Nutkin, who was much the handsomeness, was so very savage, I was obliged to take him back to the shop.
This is exactly the kind of material collectors dream of finding. A personal letter, full of personality and humor, written at the very moment Beatrix Potter was becoming one of the most successful children's authors of her generation.
From yours affectionately, Beatrix Potter.
According to the family, the letter was written in 1903 to the owner's mother, just 1 year after Peter Rabbit was published, and the same year the tale of Squirrel Nutkin first appeared. Not surprisingly, the expert was thrilled.
So this is an absolute corker of a letter. I've not seen one so good for a very long time.
Then came the valuation.
That a letter like this would fetch somewhere between £20,000 and £25,000 today.
You're joking.
£20,000 to £25,000 for a handwritten letter. Not bad for a few pages filled with rabbits, squirrels, and a white rat named Sammy. More than a century later, Beatrix Potter's imagination continues to enchant readers and collectors alike. Number 23, the French bronze clock.
Why is it so dirty? Do you not look after it? No, it lives in a box in the attic because it's so ugly. Really? Yeah. Who banished it up there? My wife.
To this family, the clock was simply an old, dusty object that nobody found particularly attractive. But to the expert, all that dirt was hiding something far more interesting.
Underneath all this filth and mess, we have the most wonderful bronze bull.
The more closely he examined it, the more signs of quality began to emerge. From the finely cast bronze work to the craftsmanship of the movement itself, everything suggested this was far from an ordinary clock. Then came an important discovery.
You're lucky. Look, the original pendulum is still there. Still there.
The original pendulum had survived intact for centuries. For collectors, details like that can make a tremendous difference. When the owner suggested the clock might be worth a few £1,000s, the expert immediately raised expectations.
Even in this state, I think your initial offer would be in the region of 20,000. 20,000 pounds in the rough like this. You're not going to replace this retail anything under 30 to 35,000.
What had spent years hidden away in an attic box was suddenly revealed as a clock worth tens of thousands of pounds. And the story did not end there. After a professional restoration, the transformation was remarkable.
The moment of truth.
Wow.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, you've done great job. That's fantastic.
Wow.
Oh, it's beautiful. It really is. No, it's not quite so ugly.
A clock once dismissed as ugly. A French masterpiece, nearly 3 centuries old, and one of the most satisfying transformations ever seen on Antique Roadshow. Number 24, the Rodin Bronze.
It was my father's great aunt's sculpture, and when she died, it came to my grandmother, and when my grandmother died, it came to my father, and he has since given it to me.
And you know the artist?
Rodin.
The sculpture has been passed down through the family for generations. According to the owner, it is a work by Auguste Rodin, one of the most important sculptors in the history of Western art.
Some consider him comparable to Michelangelo.
The piece is titled Eternal Spring, one of Rodin's best-known compositions, capturing movement, emotion, and the beauty of the human form. But when it comes to a Rodin bronze, there is always one crucial question.
The issue with sculpture is when it was made and whether or not it was made under the auspices of the artist himself.
When was it cast? And was it produced under Rodin's supervision or authorization? As the examination continued, the signs became increasingly promising.
It's actually signed Rodin, F. Barbedienne Fondor.
The signature was present. More importantly, the sculpture carried the mark of Barbedienne, one of the most respected foundries in France.
This, I feel, is an early cast, maybe a lifetime cast.
If that assessment proved correct, the value of the sculpture would change dramatically. However, one important step still remained.
You must get a certificate from the committee, Auguste Rodin.
Then came the figure that stunned everyone.
In June of this year, 2016, in London, one brought $450,000. At auction, an estimate on this would be in that $400,000 to $500,000 range.
Wow, $450,000. That is amazing. I'm flabbergasted. Suddenly want a beer.
What began as a family heirloom could turn out to be a $500,000 treasure. Or, if it failed authentication, its value could drop to only a small fraction of that amount. And that uncertainty is exactly what made this one of the most suspenseful appraisals ever seen on Antique Roadshow. Number 25, the Jade Imperial Seal.
I brought 2 jade tablets and a jade seal that belonged to my great-great-grandmother. I have been told they are 18th century from China.
The family believed these pieces dated to 18th century China and had been passed down through several generations. Presented to the expert were 2 inscribed jade plaques and a jade seal topped with a pair of dragons, a motif long associated with power, authority, and the imperial court.
The seal's a symbol of imperial authority.
But a closer examination revealed an important clue carved into the plaques.
Dated here, Guangshi, first year of Guangshi, which is 1875.
That inscription suggested the story might not belong to the 18th century after all. Instead, the objects appeared to be connected to the late Qing dynasty and possibly even to an imperial jade book or court-related commission. At that moment, the value of the collection began to change dramatically.
My mother had them appraised in 2007 for $1,400.
Together as a associated pair, they would carry an auction estimate of 20 to 30,000.
Okay, wow.
The two plaques alone were worth far more than the earlier appraisal suggested. But the jade seal was the real star of the evaluation.
And the seal appraised for $1,400 also.
Conservatively, at auction, it would carry an auction estimate of 30 to 50,000.
Okay, all right.
Even under a conservative assessment, its value had increased many times over. Yet the expert was not finished. If further research confirmed a strong connection to the Guangxu period, everything could move to an entirely different level.
So it may carry an auction estimate of 300 to 500,000.
Oh, is that all? Okay. Well, that's a little bit different than what I was expecting today, but oh my, thank you. That's amazing.
What had once been a collection valued at only a few $1,000s now carried the potential to become an imperial treasure worth as much as $500,000. Not bad for a group of jade pieces that had spent decades quietly sitting in the family.